However, a great many of them were children. And it does seem as if, rather like the practice in central Mexico, that children were the victims given up as items of sacrifice. In the case of the Aztec, they would be told that they're going to die, and their tears of fear would be what brings the rain. Century, in the 1901, 1903 kind of region, people started dredging. Edward Thompson was the leading figure in this project. They found a lot of skeletal material. There were indeed a lot of bodies in the cenote. It wasn't possible to determine skeletally whether they were virgins or not. However, a great many of them were children. And it does seem as if, rather like the practice in central Mexico, that children were the victims given up as items of sacrifice. In the case of the Aztec, they would be told that they're going to die, and their tears of fear would be what brings the rain. So it looks as if the cenote was used for that kind of thing. And as you can see, they really got serious a few years later. Actually went down with a full diving kit to wander around down there trying to pick things up. What they discovered was a lot of precious things. Gold is virtually unknown in the classic Maya era, even though it really extends all the way down to South America far, far earlier. Almost just the tiniest little pieces ever made it up to the Maya area during the classic period. However, in the post-classic that changes, and you get really the vast majority of gold that's ever been known for the Maya comes out of the cenote. So these are little golden masks. This is a much finer example. It's actually a face with a mouthpiece and sort of goggles for the eyes. This is actually represented on one of the reliefs at Chichen. You can see the same design here and the same feathered serpent up here. Now these were gold discs, but they're very, very thin. And not only were they thin, they were also scrunched up into balls and then thrown in. That's why it's very hard to see what's on this one. But using an artist rendering, we can see that they're scenes of warfare and sacrifice. If we just exchange this for another one, there's a series of antagonists, and the antagonists are displayed and portrayed in the same ways. So the people who are on the rough end of the deal wear feathers, and they look very much like contemporary Maya. The people who are succeeding, or the victors here, are carrying spear throwers, conical or drum major style headdresses, sometimes with birds coming down here, and they seem to sort of wear sort of bodysuits. So it's a very different, not particularly Maya kind of costume. Now also in the cenote was a lot of jade. Of course, jade was the Maya's gold. And what's interesting is these pieces were never thrown in, almost none of them were taken over by the Spanish. Chichen was the target of the very first successful Spanish entrada. So in 1532, Montejo the Younger went right into the middle of Yucatan and tried to establish Chichen as his new capital. He renamed it Ciudad Real, and he put a cannon at the top of the pyramid. In fact, he poked a hole through one of the walls in order for it to project out. And thereafter, that's how it got its name of El Castillo, the castle. So it was, of course, still standing when the first explorers and visitors came to the site, really beginning in the 19th century. But you can see how heavily overgrown it is. Already on the right-hand side, this has been cleared. So the left-hand side has been cleared of trees. This would have been completely covered in trees at one point. So when we now sort of throw ourselves forward, say, into the modern era where Chichen has become this great mecca, really, for certain ideas of Maya spiritualism, sort of a totemic Maya center, we have to keep in mind that when we find the famous snake on the equinox, which this shadow is projected down here and is supposed to represent the diamonds of the snake's back. Well, we know the snakes were indeed there. That's how they were found. But the thing to bear in mind is just how ruined that pyramid was. So everything about those balustrades were archaeological reconstructions. They may or may not have been accurate, but they certainly weren't created with the idea of, certainly not in the modern era, of reflecting an equinox shadow. Whether they did in ancient times, I think, is still a little bit debatable. Okay, so let's continue our tour, and if Chichen is famous for anything other than the Great Castillo, it's famous for the sacred cenote. This is the great hole in the earth. This is the sink hole. As we'll see a little bit later, Yucatan is covered in these things. It's to do with weaknesses underground, which form collapsed structures, which the water eventually wears away, and the ceiling collapses into what used to be huge caves. Here, I think you don't really get a sense of the scale, because these are sort of full-size trees up here. So it's really quite a large and very circular structure. Now, we have some ethnohistory and have some descriptions. Diego de Landa was the great chronicler of the early Maya period. He's a very ambivalent figure, a very problematic figure in many ways. But certainly, he made some comments in some of the very earliest documentary records of Chichen. So he says that into this well they have the custom of throwing men alive as a sacrifice to the gods in time of drought. He also threw in a great many other things like precious stones and things which they prized. Well, this quickly became translated into virgins. I think we can see where this is going, and indeed, there she goes. Knowing that Landa had said that a great many of prized objects were thrown into the cenote meant that people were very, very interested in what might lie beneath the water. So, beginning in the very early part of the 20th century, in the 1901, 1903 kind of region, people started dredging. Edward Thompson was the leading figure in this project. They found a lot of skeletal material. There were indeed a lot of bodies in the cenote. It wasn't possible to determine skeletally whether they were virgins or not. However, a great many of them were children. And it does seem as if, rather like the practice in central Mexico, the children were the victims given up as items of sacrifice. In the case of the Aztec, they would be told that they're going to die, and their tears of fear would be what brings the rain. So it looks as if the